Hey everybody, I'm Ian and welcome to another deep dive into fluency.
And I'm Maria. Always a pleasure to be here with you, Ian.
So today, we're going to be talking about 10 expert tips for English fluency.
Yes, 10 tips that go way beyond the typical textbook phrases.
We're really trying to unlock the secrets to sounding natural and confident in English.
That's right, like you were burned speaking English.
Okay, so let's get started with tip number 1.
Active listening.
Active listening. Now, it's easy to get stuck in textbook English.
It is.
But the real world is so different.
It is. It's much messier.
Yes, and there are all those reductions and blended words.
Right. Think about what you're doing. For what are you doing?
Exactly. It can be so hard to understand.
It can if you're not used to it.
So what can listeners do to improve their active listening skills?
Well, podcasts are great.
Okay.
You can hear so many different accents and speaking speeds.
It's true. And you can try the shadowing technique with podcasts.
Exactly.
I've tried that before.
Have you?
And it's a little awkward at first.
It can be.
But it really did help my pronunciation.
It really does. It's like having a pronunciation coach right there in your ear.
I like that. A pronunciation coach in your ear.
And aside from podcasts, just being really present during conversations.
That makes sense.
Yeah, just actively listening.
Okay, tip number 2.
Ditch the translator in your head and think directly in English.
Okay, so stop translating in your head.
Right.
Now, this is easier said than done.
It can be a challenge, but it's so important for fluency.
It is, because when you translate in your head,
you end up with that stilted speech.
yeah, it sounds unnatural.
Exactly. It's like trying to drive with one foot on the gas and one on the brake.
That's a good analogy.
So how can we make that mental shift to actually think in English?
That's the question.
Well, one good exercise is to narrate your day in English.
Okay, like just talk to yourself.
Exactly. Describe what you're doing, seeing, even feeling, all in English.
And what about when you encounter new words?
This is key. Don't translate them.
Don't translate them.
No, visualize them. Imagine them.
Oh, I see. So like if I'm learning the word apple, I should picture an apple, not the word for apple, in my native language.
Exactly. You got it.
That's interesting. I've never thought about it like that before.
It creates a much stronger connection in your brain.
Okay, so we're narrating our days and visualizing new words.
Yes, and you can even practice hypothetical conversations in your head.
Like imaginary conversations.
Yes, exactly. It's a great way to get comfortable with different situations.
I like it. Okay, let's move on to tip number 3.
Mastering pronunciation and intonation.
Yes, those can be tricky.
They can be, but they're also so crucial for sounding natural.
I think a lot of people struggle with intonation, that musicality of English.
They do, and it's understandable. English rhythm and melody are different from many other languages.
It's all about the stress and the pitch.
Right, think about the question, you're going to the party.
Okay, you're going to the party.
If you emphasize different words, the meaning changes completely.
That's true. I never thought about it that way.
So how can we work on pronunciation and intonation?
Yeah, what are some practical steps?
Well, there are some great tools out there, like pronunciation apps.
Yeah, I've heard of those. What about language exchange partners?
Those are great too. They can give you real-time feedback.
And something I've always found helpful is recording myself speaking.
Me too.
It can be a little cringy to listen back.
It can be, but it's so helpful to hear those subtle differences in your own pronunciation.
Yeah, you can really hear where you need to improve.
Exactly. Okay, so tip number 4.
Expanding your vocabulary?
But not just memorizing endless lists of words.
Oh, good. Because that never works for me.
It doesn't work for most people.
So what should we do instead?
Learn words in context.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means understanding how words are used naturally in phrases, collocations, and idioms.
Collocations, what are those?
It's like words have their favorite friends, other words they like to hang out with.
Okay, interesting.
So instead of just learning heavy and rain, you'd learn heavy rain.
So you learn the words together.
Exactly. It helps you sound more natural.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. So how do we learn these collocations?
Through authentic sources.
Why?
TV shows, podcasts, real-life conversations.
Got it. So ditch the flashcards and get out into the real world of English.
Exactly. Now, tip number 5 is a big one.
Overcoming the fear of making mistakes.
Yes, building confidence is so important.
I think everyone is afraid of making mistakes.
They are, but it's such a barrier to fluency.
It is, because you end up being too afraid to speak at all.
Exactly. So how can we embrace those mistakes and build confidence?
That's what I want to know.
Well, practicing in low-pressure environments can help.
Okay, like what?
talking to yourself in English, singing along to songs, anything that takes the pressure off.
That's a good idea. I also think finding patient language partners is key.
It is. You need people who will encourage you and give you constructive feedback.
Yeah, you don't want someone who's constantly correcting every little mistake.
Exactly. It's about creating a safe space for learning.
Okay, so action over perfection.
Absolutely. The more you speak, the more confident you'll become. Now, speaking of tools for learning.
Tip number 6 is all about technology.
Yes. We have so many amazing resources available to us now.
It's true, and it's only getting better with AI.
Like chatbots. Think ChatGPT.
Oh yeah, everyone's talking about ChatGPT.
You can use it to get real-time feedback on your English.
It's like having a 247 tutor.
It is. And there are also speech analyzer apps for pronunciation.
Like Elsa Speak.
Exactly. And don't forget about voice assistants like Siri or Google Assistant.
Oh yeah, you can use those for pronunciation practice too.
You can. If Siri doesn't understand you, you know you need to adjust your pronunciation.
Haha, that's a fun way to practice. And another simple tip is to switch all your devices to English.
Yes, that's a great way to immerse yourself in the language.
So we've got chatbots, pronunciation apps, voice assistants.
All kinds of cool tech tools.
So tip number 7 builds on this idea of immersion.
Surrounding yourself with English.
Yes, make English a part of your daily life.
Exactly. Think podcasts, movies, music, all of it.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be something you actively sit down and do.
Right. You can listen to music while you're cooking or working out.
I like to put on English podcasts while I'm cleaning.
That's a great idea. And you can even narrate your daily activities in English.
Okay, so like, I am brushing my teeth.
Exactly. It might feel silly at first, but it really helps.
Okay, so surround yourself with English. Make it a part of your life.
That's the key. All right, moving on to tip number 8.
The shadowing technique.
Have you ever tried this, Ian?
I have, and it was harder than I expected.
It's definitely more challenging than it sounds.
You're trying to keep up with the speaker in real time.
Yeah, matching their speed, tone, and rhythm.
It's like a vocal workout.
It is. So how should people approach shadowing?
We'll start with short audio clips.
Yes, maybe 10-second segments at first.
And repeat what you hear, focusing on imitating the speaker as closely as possible.
And as you get more comfortable, increase the length of the clips.
And try different accents.
Exactly. It's a fantastic way to improve your pronunciation and intonation.
Okay, on to tip number 9.
Learn from your mistakes.
Now, we talked about embracing mistakes earlier.
Yes, but how do we actually turn those stumbles into learning opportunities?
That's a good question.
Well, one effective strategy is to keep a mistake journal.
A mistake journal.
Yes. Write down every mistake you make.
So like if I say I goed instead of I went.
Exactly.
Wow.
Write it down and then write the correct version next to it.
So I have I goed and then I went right next to it.
Yes, and then practice saying the corrected sentence out loud.
So I say I went over and over again.
Exactly. It helps reinforce the correct way of speaking.
That's a good tip. I'm going to try that.
All right. And finally, tip number 10.
Joining English-speaking communities.
Yes. Get out there and practice with other people.
This is where you put all that practice to the test.
Exactly. And there's so many ways to do it.
Like online forums, language exchange groups, social media.
All kinds of options. And the key here is to prioritize communication over perfection.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Don't be afraid. Just jump in and start talking.
It's all about practice, practice, practice.
Exactly. And you know, before we move on, I think it's important to highlight a couple of key takeaways that run through all 10 of these tips.
Oh, definitely. What are you thinking?
Well, first, consistency is crucial. It's not about studying for hours on end. It's about making English a part of your daily life.
Small, consistent actions add up to big results over time.
Exactly. It's like building a muscle. You have to work it regularly.
And the second takeaway.
Fluency is about natural usage, not textbook perfection.
Yeah, it's about finding your own voice in English.
Exactly. Embrace the messiness, the imperfections, the journey of learning.
It's all about the journey.
It is.
Okay, now before we move on to our next batch of tips,
Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge the emotional side of language learning.
Yes, absolutely. It can be a real roller coaster.
There are highs and lows. You feel like you're making progress one day, and the next day you feel like you're back at square one.
It's true, and it can be discouraging.
It can be. So how can we stay motivated and deal with those emotional ups and downs?
Well, first, celebrate your wins. Every win, no matter how small.
So even if I just learned one new word today, that's a win.
It is. Acknowledge your progress. Give yourself credit.
Okay, celebrate the wins.
Yes. And don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, talk to a friend, a teacher, a fellow language learner.
Exactly. Sharing your experiences can help you stay motivated.
And remember, everyone learns at their own pace.
That's so important.
Don't compare yourself to others.
Don't. Focus on your own journey.
Your own progress.
And your own accomplishments.
Exactly. And most importantly, be kind to yourself.
Yes. Learning a language is a challenge, but it's also a gift.
It's a passport to a world of new experiences and connections.
Beautifully said.
So as we move on to our next set of tips, we want to hear from you, the listener.
Yes. Tell us what resonated with you today.
What's one takeaway you'll carry with you on your English learning adventure?
We're all on this journey together, and we're here to support you every step of the way.
Exactly. So keep practicing, keep learning, and never give up on your dreams of fluency.
That's right. And remember, the journey to fluency is an ongoing process.
Filled with twists and turns.
And unexpected discoveries.
So embrace the challenges.
Celebrate the victories.
And never stop exploring the world of English.
Until next time.
Happy learning.
Bye, everyone. You know, one thing that can be tricky is navigating between formal and informal English.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Like knowing when to use slang or contractions.
It's true. There's textbook English and then there's real-world English.
Exactly. And it's important to know which style is appropriate for different situations.
Like you wouldn't use slang in a job interview?
Definitely not.
But you might use slang with friends.
Right. It's all about context.
Okay, so formal English is for those more serious situations.
Yes, like business meetings or academic writing.
Yeah, where you need to sound professional.
Exactly.
And informal English is for more relaxed settings.
Like hanging out with friends or family.
Where you can be more casual.
Right. And it can be tricky to switch back and forth.
It can, but it's something you learn with practice and exposure.
Definitely. Paying attention to how people speak in different situations is key.
Yeah, like watching movies and TV shows.
Exactly. You can learn a lot about how people use language in different contexts.
Okay, so we've talked about formal and informal English.
Now let's dive into a specific aspect of informal English idioms.
Oh yeah, idioms. Those can be tricky.
They can be. They often don't make sense if you translate them literally.
Like kick the bucket.
Exactly. It means to die.
But if you didn't know that, it would sound really strange.
It would. So how can we learn idioms effectively?
Yeah, is it just about memorizing lists?
Well, memorizing lists can be helpful, but it's more important to learn them in context.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
When you encounter an idiom in a movie or a song, pay attention to how it's used.
So I understand its meaning in that specific situation.
Exactly. And the more you encounter an idiom in different situations, the deeper your understanding will become.
So it's about exposure and practice, not just memorization.
Precisely. And using idioms correctly can really make your English sound more natural and colorful.
I like that. It's like adding spice to your language.
Exactly. Now, let's move on to another tricky aspect of English phrasal verbs.
Okay, phrasal verbs, those are the ones that combine a verb with a preposition, right?
Exactly. Like look up, look after, look into.
Yeah, and the meaning changes depending on the preposition.
It does, and they can be really confusing for learners.
Because the meaning isn't always obvious.
Exactly. So again, context is key.
So how can we learn phrasal verbs effectively?
Pay attention to how they're used in real-life situations, just like with idioms.
Try to identify patterns in their meanings.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification if you're not sure.
So it's about exposure, practice, and asking for help when you need it.
Yes. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that can be both fascinating and overwhelming.
What's that?
The variety of English accents.
Oh yeah, there are so many different accents out there.
From British to American to Australian to countless regional variations.
It's like a global symphony of sounds.
I love that. And while this diversity is what makes English so rich, it can also be a challenge for learners.
It's true, you might encounter an accent that's completely unfamiliar and have no idea what they're saying.
Exactly, but don't let that discourage you.
So what can we do to improve our understanding of different accents?
The more you expose yourself to different accents, the better your ear will become at recognizing the subtle differences.
So listen to podcasts from different regions.
Yes. Watch movies with diverse casts.
Engage in conversations with people from various English-speaking backgrounds.
Exactly. The more you hear, the more you understand.
Okay, now let's talk about a specific situation that can be challenging for even advanced English learners.
What's that?
Speaking on the phone.
Ah, yes. Phone conversations can be tricky.
Because you can't see the person you're talking to.
Right. You can't rely on body language or facial expressions.
It's all about the words.
And it can be even more nerve-wracking when it's a professional call, like a job interview.
Oh, absolutely. The pressure is on.
So how can we make those phone conversations less daunting?
Yeah, what are your top tips?
Well, first, create a calm and focused environment.
Okay, so no distractions.
Right. Minimize distractions, have a pen and paper ready for notes, and maybe a glass of water nearby.
Those are all good tips.
And if you know you're going to be making an important call, rehearse beforehand.
So think about what you want to say.
And anticipate potential questions you might be asked.
It's like a dress rehearsal for the conversation.
Exactly. And during the call, speak clearly and enunciate your words.
So don't rush.
No, take your time and speak slowly and deliberately.
And if you don't understand something,
Don't be afraid to ask for clarification. It's better to ask than to pretend you understand and potentially create confusion.
that's a good point. So ask questions if you need to.
Exactly. And remember, the more you practice speaking on the phone, the more comfortable you'll become.
Okay, let's move on to another communication challenge.
What's that?
Giving presentations in English,
Ah, yes. Presentations can be nerve-wracking.
especially for English learners.
It's true, but remember, everyone gets nervous before presentations, even native speakers.
So it's normal to feel nervous.
Absolutely. The key is to prepare thoroughly and practice your delivery.
Okay, so how can we prepare for a presentation in English?
Well, start by defining your purpose and your audience.
Okay, so what message do I want to convey?
And who am I speaking to?
So I tailor my content and language accordingly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then organize your thoughts into a logical structure.
So it's easy to follow,
Right, and use visuals to enhance your presentation.
like charts and graphs.
Exactly. They can help illustrate your points and keep your audience engaged.
And when it comes to language, keep it clear and concise.
Yes, use simple sentences and avoid jargon.
It's about getting your message across in a way that everyone can understand.
Exactly. And don't forget to practice your delivery. Rehearse out loud, paying attention to your pace, intonation, and pronunciation.
So the more I practice, the more confident I'll sound.
Absolutely. And remember, it's okay to make mistakes.
Everyone makes mistakes.
Exactly. The important thing is to keep going and not let a few slip-ups derail your entire presentation.
Okay, so prepare, practice, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
That's right. Now, let's talk about something that can be incredibly beneficial for language learning.
What's that?
Traveling to an English-speaking country.
The ultimate immersion experience.
It is. It allows you to experience the language and culture in a way that's simply not possible at home.
It's like stepping into a living, breathing English textbook.
Exactly. And while traveling can be intimidating at first, it's an incredibly rewarding experience.
So what are your top tips for making the most of a language immersion trip?
Well, first, do some research and choose a destination that aligns with your interests.
And has a level of English that you feel comfortable with.
Exactly. You want to set yourself up for success.
And once you're there, what should you do?
Be proactive about seeking opportunities to use English. Talk to locals, ask for directions, order food in restaurants, participate in activities that interest you.
So really push yourself outside of your comfort zone.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. People are generally very understanding, especially if you're making an effort to speak their language.
Okay, so be proactive, don't be afraid of mistakes, and enjoy the experience.
Absolutely. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that can add a lot of flavor to your English.
What's that?
Slang.
Slang.
Those informal words and phrases that can make you sound cool and authentic.
But slang can be tricky.
It can be. It changes so rapidly and varies so much from region to region.
It's like a secret code that's constantly evolving.
That's a great way to put it. And while using slang appropriately can make you sound more natural and fluent, it's important to use it with caution.
Yeah, you don't want to use slang in every situation.
Exactly. You wouldn't use it in a formal presentation or a job interview.
It could come across as unprofessional or disrespectful.
Right. But using slang appropriately in casual settings can make you sound more confident and connected to the culture.
So it's about knowing when and where to use it.
Exactly. So how can we navigate the world of slang effectively?
That's a good question.
The key is to listen and observe.
Okay, so pay attention to how native speakers use slang.
Yes. Watch movies, TV shows, listen to music, and try to pick up on the slang words and phrases.
And if I encounter a new slang term that I don't understand,
Look it up online or ask a native speaker for clarification.
it's always best to be sure of the meaning before you start using it yourself.
Exactly. And remember, slang is constantly evolving, so what's cool today might be outdated tomorrow.
It's like fashion trends come and go.
Exactly. So stay curious, keep learning, and don't be afraid to experiment with slang, but always use it with caution and respect for the culture.
Okay, so we've talked about slang.
Now let's move on to another important aspect of communication.
What's that?
active listening.
Active listening. Now, that's something we could all probably improve on.
It's true. It's a skill that takes practice.
But it's so important for effective communication.
It is. Active listening is more than just hearing the words. It's about truly understanding the message behind them.
So how can we become more active listeners?
Well, start by making eye contact with the speaker and showing that you're engaged in what they're saying.
Okay, so nod your head, smile, use verbal cues.
Exactly. Those are all good ways to show that you're listening.
And what about interrupting?
Avoid interrupting. Let the speaker finish their thought before you jump in with your own comments or questions.
Okay, so be patient and let them finish speaking.
Right, and when you do ask questions, make sure they're relevant to what the speaker is saying.
So ask clarifying questions or questions that encourage the speaker to elaborate on their point.
Exactly. It shows that you're genuinely interested in what they have to say.
And what about multitasking while listening?
Try to avoid it. Put away your phone, close your laptop, and focus on the conversation at hand.
So give the speaker your undivided attention.
Exactly. It shows respect and helps you really understand what they're saying.
Okay, so eye contact, no interrupting, relevant questions, and no multitasking.
Those are all key components of active listening.
And remember, it's a skill that takes practice.
The more you do it, the better you'll become.
Okay, let's move on to another communication scenario that can be challenging.
What's that?
Participating in group conversations in English,
Ah, yes. Group conversations can be a bit of a whirlwind.
especially when everyone's talking at once.
It can be hard to follow along, especially for English learners.
It can be. So how can we navigate those group conversations with more confidence?
Well, first, don't be afraid to listen more than you speak, especially at the beginning.
Okay, so just observe the dynamics of the group.
Exactly. Pay attention to the flow of the conversation and try to identify key themes or topics that you feel comfortable discussing.
So find your entry point.
Exactly. And when you are ready to contribute, start by making a brief comment or asking a question related to what's already being discussed.
So ease into the conversation.
Exactly. And don't worry if you don't understand every single word. It's perfectly okay to ask for clarification.
Yeah, it's better to ask than to pretend you understand and miss out on something important.
Absolutely. And remember, group conversations are all about sharing ideas and perspectives, so don't be afraid to voice your opinion, even if it differs from the others in the group.
So add your unique voice to the mix.
Exactly. And most importantly, relax and enjoy the conversation.
Don't put too much pressure on yourself to be perfect.
Exactly. It's about connecting with others and enjoying the experience.
Now let's talk about something that can really elevate your English and make you stand out as a confident speaker.
What's that? Humor.
Ah, humor, the universal language.
It's a powerful tool for building rapport and making a memorable impression.
It is. And using humor effectively in English can make you sound more engaging, approachable, and even intelligent. It's like adding a sprinkle of magic to your conversations.
I love that. But of course, humor can be tricky to master in a different language.
It's true. You have to understand cultural nuances and find humor that resonates with your audience.
Exactly. So how can our listener develop a sense of humor in English?
Yeah. How can we learn to make people laugh?
Well, first, expose yourself to different types of humor. Watch stand-up comedies, sitcoms, funny movies.
Pay attention to the jokes, the timing, the delivery.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment with different styles of humor.
Find what works best for you and your personality.
Exactly. Some people are naturally good at telling jokes, while others excel at witty observations or sarcastic remarks.
So find your comedic voice.
Exactly. And remember, humor is all about timing and delivery.
A well-timed pause can make all the difference.
It can. And when it comes to cultural nuances, be mindful of what might be considered offensive or inappropriate in different cultures.
Yeah, it's always best to err on the side of caution.
It is, especially when you're still learning the ropes of humor in a new language.
So be respectful and sensitive to the cultural context.
Absolutely. And most importantly, have fun. Humor is meant to be enjoyed, so relax, let your personality shine through, and don't take yourself too seriously.
Embrace the joy of laughter.
Exactly. Okay, let's talk about another foundational skill that's often overlooked, but is essential for fluency.
What's that?
Reading widely in English.
Reading, yes, it's such a great way to improve your vocabulary.
And your grammar, and your overall understanding of the language.
It's true, and the beauty of reading is that you can do it at your own pace.
You can choose materials that genuinely interest you.
Exactly. From novels to biographies to news articles to blogs, The options are endless.
They are. And when you encounter a new word or phrase while you're reading, take the time to look it up and understand its meaning.
Don't just skip over it.
No, actively engage with the language. Try to use that new word or phrase in your own writing or conversation.
And don't be afraid to challenge yourself.
That's right. Start with materials that are slightly above your current level of understanding.
And as you progress, you can gradually increase the difficulty.
Exactly. It's like lifting weights. You need to gradually increase the weight to build muscle.
I like that analogy. So read widely, challenge yourself, and actively engage with the language.
Those are the keys to improving your English through reading.
Now let's talk about something that can be a bit of a sensitive topic, but is actually a crucial part of learning.
What's that?
Making mistakes.
Ah, yes, mistakes, those inevitable stumbles along the path to fluency.
They could be frustrating, embarrassing, and even discouraging at times.
It's true, but remember, mistakes are a natural part of the learning process.
Everyone makes mistakes.
Even native speakers.
It's part of being human.
Exactly. And the key is to shift your perspective on mistakes.
Okay, so instead of seeing them as failures,
See them as opportunities for growth and improvement.
embrace the imperfections and learn from them.
Exactly. So how can we turn mistakes into valuable learning experiences?
Yeah, what are some practical strategies?
Well, first, don't be afraid to make mistakes. The more you speak and write in English, the more mistakes you'll make. But that's okay. It's all part of the process.
It's like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall a few times before you find your balance.
Exactly. And when you do make a mistake, don't beat yourself up about it.
Simply acknowledge it, correct it if possible, and move on.
Right. Don't dwell on the past. Focus on the present and the future.
And if you're not sure why you made a mistake,
Ask for clarification. A teacher, a tutor, or a native speaker can help you understand the rule or concept behind the mistake.
so turn those mistakes into learning moments.
Exactly. And keep track of your mistakes in a notebook or a digital document.
So you can identify patterns and focus on areas that need improvement.
Precisely. It's like keeping a fluency journal.
I like that. Okay, so don't be afraid of mistakes, learn from them, and track your progress.
Absolutely. And most importantly, be patient with yourself.
Fluency takes time and effort.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Beautifully said. Now let's talk about a social situation that could be both exhilarating and nerve-wracking.
What's that?
Attending social events in English.
Ah, yes, social events. Those gatherings where conversations flow and connections are made.
They can be fantastic opportunities to practice your English and immerse yourself in the culture, but they can also be daunting if you're not feeling confident.
It's true. It can feel like you're on a social stage with everyone watching and listening to you.
Exactly. So how can we navigate those social events with more ease and enjoy the experience?
Well, first, choose events that align with your interests.
Okay, so if I love art, I might go to a gallery opening.
Exactly. If you love music, go to a concert.
Find events where you'll feel comfortable and engaged.
Right. And before the event, do a little research.
So familiarize myself with common topics of conversation.
Yes. And prepare a few questions or comments you can use to initiate conversations.
It's like having a conversation starter kit.
Exactly. And during the event, focus on listening and observing.
So pay attention to how people interact with each other.
Yes. And try to pick up on social cues and body language.
It's like being a social anthropologist, observing a new culture.
I love that. And when you feel ready to join a conversation,
Start by making a simple comment or asking a question.
exactly, ease into the conversation.
And don't worry about making mistakes. People are generally very understanding.
They are, especially if you're making an effort to communicate.
Okay, so choose events that interest you, do your research, be observant, ease into conversations, and don't be afraid of mistakes.
Those are all great tips for navigating social events in English.
And most importantly, relax and have fun.
Absolutely. Social events are meant to be enjoyed.
Okay, let's talk about a topic that can be a bit of a minefield when it comes to communication.
What's that?
Cultural differences.
Ah, yes. Cultural differences. Those subtle but significant variations in how people communicate, express emotions, and build relationships.
It's true. What might be considered polite and appropriate in one culture could be perceived as rude or offensive in another.
It's like navigating a social maze with invisible walls.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So how can we become more culturally sensitive in our communication?
Well, first and foremost, do your research. Before interacting with people from a different culture, take some time to learn about their customs, values, and communication norms.
Okay, so knowledge is power.
It is. And be observant.
Ah.
Pay attention to how people interact with each other.
Their tone of voice, their body language, their facial expressions.
Exactly. Those are all clues to how they communicate.
And be mindful of your own communication style.
Yes. Are you naturally direct or indirect? Do you use a lot of humor or sarcasm?
So be aware of your own tendencies and how they might be perceived in different cultural contexts.
Exactly. And be willing to adapt. When interacting with people from a different culture, be flexible and adjust your vulnerable, but is actually a sign of strength.
What's that?
Asking for help.
Asking for help. But isn't that a sign of weakness?
Not at all. It's actually a sign of humility and a willingness to learn.
And when it comes to learning English, asking for help is essential.
Absolutely. No one can master a language in isolation.
So how can we overcome that fear of asking for help?
Well, first, identify the areas where you need help.
So do I need help with grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary?
Exactly. And once you know what you need help with, you can start looking for resources or people who can provide that support.
So be specific in your requests.
Yes. And don't be afraid to ask your teacher, tutor, or language exchange partner for clarification or feedback.
That's what they're there for.
Exactly. And don't limit yourself to formal learning environments. Ask your friends, family members, or colleagues who speak English to practice with you or to answer your questions.
So tap into the resources around you.
Exactly. And remember, asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength.
It shows that you're committed to learning.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to another important aspect of language learning.
What's that?
Practicing regularly.
Practicing? Ah, yes, that's the key to fluency.
It is. Consistent practice is crucial for building fluency and confidence in English.
But finding the time and motivation to practice can be tough.
It can be, but the good news is that there are countless ways to practice English that are both effective and enjoyable.
Oh, I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
Well, first, find activities that you genuinely enjoy.
Okay, so if I love music, I could sing along to English songs.
Exactly. If you're a movie buff, watch English movies and TV shows.
Make practice a pleasure, not a chore.
Precisely.
Right.
And turn everyday activities into opportunities to practice.
So like, think in English while I'm doing chores.
Exactly. It's about integrating English into your daily life.
And what about practicing with other people?
That's a great idea. Find a language partner or join a conversation group.
It's a good way to stay motivated and get feedback on your progress.
It is. And remember, consistency is key.
So aim to practice English every day, even if it's just for a few minutes.
Exactly. Small, consistent efforts add up to big results over time.
Okay, now let's talk about a fear that I think many English learners share.
What's that?
The fear of making mistakes in public.
Yes, that's a common fear.
It can be so embarrassing.
It can be, but remember, everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers.
It's true, but it can still feel scary.
It can. So how can we overcome that fear and speak English with more confidence?
Yeah, what are your tips?
Well, first, remember that most people are kind and understanding.
They're not judging you as harshly as you might be judging yourself.
Exactly. And focus on communicating your message clearly, even if it's not grammatically perfect.
Prioritize meaning over perfection.
Absolutely. And practice speaking in public as much as possible.
The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll become.
Exactly. And if you do make a mistake, don't dwell on it. Simply acknowledge it, correct it if possible, and move on.
Don't let one mistake ruin your whole day.
Exactly. And remember, making mistakes is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're learning and growing.
Okay, so be kind to yourself, focus on communication, practice speaking in public, and don't be afraid of mistakes.
Those are all great tips for overcoming the fear of making mistakes.
Now let's talk about something that can be really helpful for staying motivated.
What's that?
Setting realistic goals.
Goals are so important. They give us something to strive for.
And when it comes to language learning, setting realistic goals is crucial for staying on track.
Absolutely. But sometimes it can be hard to know where to start.
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming.
So how can we set realistic goals that will help us improve our English?
That's a good question.
Well, first, assess your current level of English.
Okay, so be honest with myself about my strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly. And then identify your specific goals.
So what do I want to achieve with my English?
Do you want to be able to hold conversations with native speakers? Travel to an English-speaking country? Read English books and articles?
Have a clear vision of what I want to accomplish.
Exactly. And break down those larger goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
So it feels less overwhelming.
Right. And set deadlines for your goals.
So I have a timeline to follow.
Yes. And track your progress along the way. Celebrate your successes and learn from your setbacks.
So acknowledge my efforts and recognize how far I've come.
Exactly. And most importantly, be patient with yourself.
Fluency takes time and effort.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Beautifully said. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
It's really important to remember that language learning can be emotional.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about memorizing words and grammar rules.
Right. There are highs and lows, moments of excitement, and moments of frustration.
It can feel like you're on a roller coaster sometimes.
It can. So how can we deal with those emotional ups and downs? How can we stay motivated even when it gets tough?
That's a great question, because I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Well, first of all, celebrate your wins. Every win, no matter how small.
So even if I just learn one new idiom today, that's a win.
Exactly. It's important to acknowledge your progress, to give yourself credit for the effort you're putting in.
Okay, so celebrate those small victories.
Yes. And don't be afraid to reach out for support when you need it.
Like talk to a friend, a teacher, a fellow language learner.
Exactly. Sharing your experiences with others can help you stay motivated and on track.
Because sometimes it helps to know that you're not alone in those struggles.
Absolutely. And remember, everyone learns at their own pace.
That's so important to remember.
It is. Don't compare yourself to others. Focus on your own journey.
Your own progress, your own goal.
Exactly. And most importantly, be kind to yourself.
Be kind to yourself. That's such a great reminder.
Learning a language is a challenge, but it's also a gift, a passport to a world of new experiences and connections.
Beautifully said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of English fluency, we want to hear from you, listener.
Yes, tell us what resonated with you today.
What's one tip or strategy that you'll take with you on your English learning adventure?
Remember, the journey to fluency is ongoing. It's a process of continuous learning and growth.
Embrace the challenges, celebrate the victories, and never stop exploring the fascinating world of English.
Until next time.
Happy learning, everyone.